I absolutely believe that Ukraine should be a member of NATO because not only would it be better for Ukrainian security, it would be better for European security. The Kremlin cannot be trusted. So nobody believes that the Kremlin will comply. If there is a negotiated settlement at some time in the next 6 months, before the end of the year, whenever, or observers or something.
Greetings to everyone watching The Gaze. I am Sakan Imazayev, and this is our project People of Goodwill. The guests of this program, in whatever way they can, support Ukraine in its heroic struggle against Russian aggression. And today, our guest is an American military commander, Lieutenant General, and now a military analyst, Ben Hodges.
Ben Hodges is a military analyst and retired American officer. He was born in 1958 in the United States. He is a graduate of the United States Military Academy. In 1989, he became an instructor at the U.S. Army Infantry School. He served as the commander of the U.S. Army in Europe. He also held the position of senior battalion officer in the 101st Airborne Division. Later, he became an aide-de-camp to the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces in Europe. Currently, he heads the Pershing Chair in Strategic Studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis.
Thank you very much, General Hodges, for being with us. And the first question is, what phase of the war is currently taking place? A military science perspective. How do you assess the situation on the front line?
Well, of course, if you are a soldier in a trench in Pokrovsk or in some places like that, it's terrible. If you are a Ukrainian soldier in the Kursk direction, things look a little bit better. I think if you are in the in the Kremlin, or if you are responsible for Russian economy, not so good. So I think we're at this phase where neither side can knock out the other, and it feels almost as if there's a industrial competition. Can Russia achieve what it needs before its economy collapses, or can Ukraine achieve what it wants before negotiations? So I think this is where we are.
It is almost 3 years of surprised you about the Ukrainian army over these years of war.
Well, of course, the war started 11 years ago. The large-scale operation started 3 years ago, you're correct. I think what has surprised me is, and what surprised the world, is how quickly Ukraine transitioned from the very first days of the large-scale invasion to a force through innovation and endurance and courage, managed to be able to stop the Russian army. That's impressive because, I was in Kyiv in late January 2022, and they did not seem ready for the conflict. So I think the way that they transitioned has surprised all of us in a positive way.
And what about Russian army? What surprised you?
3 things. First of all, I had expected that the Army would do much better, all the armed forces, the Air Force, the Navy as well. But I think that they were victims of a terrible plan that was organized by the FSB. This was not the General Staff that planned it, in my view. So I think the overall performance of Russian armed forces, and there's lots of blame, but I think if the General Staff had planned this, it would have gone perhaps differently. The second thing about the Russian side that has surprised me is the failure of the Air Force to achieve air superiority. But they never could achieve air superiority over Ukraine. And so because of that, they have not been able to destroy any of the convoys or trains bringing equipment and ammunition from Poland into Ukraine. That's a huge failure. That surprised me. The third thing I think is on the Russian side. I would have never guessed that Russia would require ammunition from North Korea and drones. That Russia could not produce everything it needs. Um, that's a surprise to me.
Let's talk about the Ukrainian decisions. What breakthrough, innovate, outstanding decisions has the Ukrainian command implemented over the past year? And can the Kursk operation be considered as a successful one?
Yeah, so Kursk is right at the top of my list. Not everybody agrees with this. Some people criticize it, but I think this was a very important and significant, is a significant operation because it changed the narrative. It created a dilemma for the Kremlin that they have to do something about this now. It changes their negotiation start point. It destroyed the myth that somehow Russian army could never be defeated. So that's the first big Ukrainian decision, I think, that really stands out in my mind. The third thing, or the second thing, is what they have done in the Black Sea. The decision to make Sevastopol untenable for the Russian Navy. And so even though Ukraine Navy does not have ships in the traditional sense, they used a combination of drones and special forces and sabotage and anti-ship missiles to drive the Russian Navy away. That was impressive, and it was important because it opened up the sea lanes again. And even today, Russia is not able to put mines. And the third big decision I think that Ukraine has made is to finally begin to reorganize the command structure. And it's always a tough decision. Do you build new units or do you fill old units with individual replacement? I don't know how it's going to end up, but at least they are addressing the concerns the problems that they have with command and control, and also, do they have enough units to carry out operations?
General, at the beginning of this invasion, we discussed that military success largely depends on logistics. Who is handling logistical challenges more effectively?
An excellent question. It feels like Ukraine has improved its logistical situation somewhat, partly through its own increased defense industry. It's producing a lot of drones that it uses, for example. There's still not enough ammunition, but it seems like we are past the period where there was almost no ammunition. So that's probably a combination of local production plus what partners are providing. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the Russian Air Force has failed to destroy any of the convoys. That is amazing to me. On the Russian side, to their credit, despite huge losses, they still managed to find ammunition, equipment for soldiers. Of course, because of the amount of drones that are in the air, it's very difficult for trucks to move around to deliver things. So the Russians, who are the attacking force, have got to find other means of delivering ammunition, food, supplies to their soldiers that are in the attack, because they have so. Who's winning it? I couldn't say, but the Russians seem to have enough so far to do what they have to do. The Ukrainian situation is getting better. And I guess it's important to note that Ukraine's ability to hit the Russian oil and gas infrastructure, that also affects logistics. Not only does it disrupt the sale of Russian oil and gas to China and India, disrupts fuel that's available for Russian armed forces.
One of the most ridiculous decisions of the Kremlin of Putin during this war is deployment of North Korean troops. What was that about? How do you think?
Well, of course, I don't know the whole backstory, but probably was the case of where they need more soldiers, more bodies, especially people that are already trained somehow. And so North Korea provided the 12,000, I think, an organization, then 12,000 brand new recruits from somewhere in the problem is, of course, that they use them as cannon fodder. They just, and of course, the North Korean troops suffered enormous casualties. Tactics, as I've listened to what Ukrainian officers have said in describing the North Koreans, the tactics that they used were what their grandfathers used in the Korean War. I mean, just online running across open fields the way they did in 1950 and 51 and 52. So I don't know that it's, and perhaps there's more that will come, but I'm not hearing reports of that. I don't know what the agreement was between Russia and Pyongyang. If it was money, technology, gas, or some combination, agreement was between Russia and if it was money, technology, gas, or some combination. But I don't imagine that Kim Jong-un, the president of North Korea, is having to face a lot of complaints from his population, just like Putin does not have to worry about complaints from his population.
And the same question regarding the Oreshnik system. Very difficult to distinguish Russian military PR and propaganda from reality.
Yeah, that's another interesting question. There were threats that this was going to be new technology and this was going to be a real, not to be so, and that in fact it was old technology. As I reflect back on that this was a last attempt by the Russian side to threaten Ukraine and the West that they were going to use a nuclear weapon somehow, that this was a step. And of course, I don't think anybody now really believes that Russia would use their weapons. So that was another wasted effort. Of course, we don't know exactly what Russia still has. I don't know. But when I saw that, I thought maybe they really are running out of precision, long-range capabilities. And the general staff would probably be very concerned about Russia using too many of these things would be needed in case there really was a real legitimate threat against their motherland.
Let's talk about the NATO organization in the context of potential membership. Do you still believe Ukraine should join NATO? And why this opinion not shared by all Western politicians?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that Ukraine should be a member of NATO because not only would it be better for Ukrainian security, it would be better for European security. The alliance would get better immediately with hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian troops, all that experience, the growing defense industry. That would do a lot to improve security and stability on the Black. I hear people, I know you're right, a lot of people don't agree with that, and people have different reasons or excuses for it, but I think that it will eventually happen. This idea that if Ukraine joined, it would be immediately at war with, we would be immediately at war with Russia, that's absolutely a false narrative. That's what the Russians want us to believe, and there are people that do believe it, but I am pretty confident that Russia does not want to get into a war with NATO. I mean, if they have been unable to defeat Ukraine without too much help from us, then why would they want to engage in a conflict with all of NATO that would involve the U.S.? So it just makes no sense as far as that excuse. There are some European countries, particularly in the West, Western Europe, not just my own, but also Germany, France, Netherlands, that are uneasy with the idea of Ukraine joining. And so what we've got to do is find ways, in other words, just exactly what happened before Poland joined NATO, is that the Poles moved so quickly, so fast to change the perception of Poland. They did all the things necessary to, not only in terms of transparency and corruption, but procedures. I mean, they really made it a national priority. And so I think Ukraine will probably want to do the same thing as soon as this war is over, to what they are doing in such a way that in other countries will want to be on that winning side. They will want to be a part of that. And Yeah, that's going to take some hard work. But if that's a priority for Ukraine, then I think there are other countries that will help them do it.
Are security guarantees for Ukraine possible outside of NATO? All these initiatives, peacemakers, maybe from United Nations or maybe from European countries?
The only true, real security guarantee, of course, is NATO. But in the meanwhile, there is a negotiated settlement at some time in the next 6 months, before the end of the year, whenever. Um, there will have to be some sort of a peacekeeping force or observers or something, because nobody believes that the Kremlin will comply with any agreement. I mean, there's no record of them ever living up to any agreement. I mean, even General Kellogg said that, the Kremlin cannot be trusted. So there will have to be a force that's there to make sure that they comply. And it cannot be the observers like we had during the Minsk process. They have to be real soldiers, not blue helmets, but real soldiers with capability and the authorization, the rules of engagement that would allow them to fight against Russians when Russia violates the agreement. So that's a part of it. But in the meanwhile, Ukraine has things to do on its own. It has to continue to grow its own defense industry. It has to continue to reform its armed forces so that they are modernized, capable, well trained, and that they have enough. They obviously have to fix their recruiting system to get more women and men into the armed forces. And they have to continue on the Ukrainian side. And I also imagine there will be some countries, particularly in Eastern Europe, that will want to continue helping Ukraine even after a ceasefire. So I would imagine defense industry investment, ammunition, all these things will continue.
It is more or less like in Israel, to be ready for decades.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you live next to a hostile country, that's what you do. That's what Finland does. They live next to a hostile country. So that's why they have this huge defense industry and a large force that are in the reserves that can be mobilized very quickly. And I think Poland is getting the same way. So this is Ukraine's future.
And the last question, General, about the Russian militarism. Put an end to Russian militarism. What is the solution?
Defeat. Defeat. They have to be defeated. If they are not defeated, then this will continue, and there will be another Putin after this one, or somebody like him. Reform in Russia only comes after they are finally beaten in a conflict, and we should not be scared of that. We should not worry about, oh my gosh, what happens. I think that for the benefit of Russian people as well as Europe, they have to be defeated, and we should anticipate that. We should plan for that, and then perhaps reforms could take place inside Russia that would benefit 140 million people instead of what they have now, where only 1 million benefit from all that wealth.
It's a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you, General, for this interview and for everything you have already done and still doing for our victory. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the privilege of being on your program.
Bye, see you.
That was Lieutenant General of the US Army, now military analyst, Ben Hodges. Leave your comments under this video, share this interview on your social media, and subscribe to the Gaze channel's social media accounts. With that, I bid you farewell, and I'll see you in the next episodes. Take care of each other, and take care of Ukraine.